Welcome to toy-polloi.
Hello and welcome to another video from toy-polloi, and in today's video we are going to be upgrading a little mini diorama that I made for my Masters of the Universe figures a while back. Now I was actually going to start making some new dioramas for these figures. In fact, you can see in front here I've actually bought some pieces as a sort of basis to start some new dioramas. But while I was setting up this shot, I realised that one of my mini dioramas that I made previously using the door from a vintage Castle Grayskull wasn't actually still looking as good as it was when I originally made it. There were a few issues, and I thought it would be fun to take that apart, rebuild it and add some lights to it. So that is what we're going to be doing today. But in future I will also come back and make a new little mini diorama using these rocks and pieces. So if you have any suggestions for what I can do with those, leave some comments below. But for now, let's get on with upgrading my previous mini diorama. So here we have the two little sort of mini dioramas that I made. These are made using the remains of doors from Castle Grayskull. I basically took the door, added a little base to it so it stands upright, and then repainted it with some sort of extra details on the bottom. And they're really nice for displaying with your figures. They just add that extra little bit of detail behind whichever figure you put in front of it. And I made two of these in that video. In fact, the one that He-Man is standing on is the one that I made first. And this one has a few issues. The paint on it I was never massively happy with. I think it's a little bit dark, so it's always looked a little bit gloomy. And the base that I made, again made out of some bits of styrene, was a little bit too big. In fact, it sticks out the front quite a long way. The second one, you can see I made a shorter base that sticks out of the back. So because on this one it's sticking out the front, we end up with a very wobbly base because the door is essentially sort of pushing it backwards like that. And over time it's caused this piece of styrene to get a little bit of a bow in it, and as you can see it's now fairly bowed. So what I want to do is replace that completely, and I'm going to upgrade it to have the same base that I made on this one, which seems to work a whole lot better. And I thought an extra thing we could do to this is actually add some lights to it, because we have a whole piece here where you can hide things. And I was sort of rummaging through my box of spares and bits, and ages ago on the channel I made a little mini diorama for my Star Wars Ewoks, and I used some LED tea lights to make little flaming torches. It turns out I actually have the remains of one more of those in my spares box. So this is a sort of fake little flame that was on top of the tea light, and this is a little flickering sort of yellowy orange LED. So I think with that we can make something to go in front of the door and basically rebuild the whole bottom of this and add a little pillar. I just think it will look really quite nice. So rather than making a new diorama, let's update an old diorama with some new bits. So here we have the two dioramas that I made. You can see this one just sits a whole lot better. Having a shorter front to it means that you stand the figure not on the actual diorama, just in front of it. This one with the larger base, you can see because the door is quite heavy and tall, is wanting it to sort of tilt backwards, and having that extra little lip there stops this door doing the same thing. As I showed, for some reason this bottom piece is sort of bowed over time. It might be because it's sort of being tilted forwards. I've always had a figure standing on this and it's just sort of bowed it a bit. So yeah, what we're going to do is actually break this off. It was plastic welded onto the bottom, and then I've sort of done a few little bits of milliput and stuff around it to blend it in. So I'm hoping I should just be able to break this off just by sort of twisting the plastic. It's going to feel pretty brutal doing this, and it's a bit of a shame to break something that I've spent so long sort of making. But I think we can improve this with LEDs and a new base. So let's try and get this bottom piece off without causing too much damage. I might have to get a knife out and do a bit of twisting as well. It is incredibly well held on. That's the good thing with plastic weld. Once you've stuck something, it is really stuck. Yeah, this is going to prove harder than I thought. Oh yes, one end has now started to come away, so maybe if I get a knife in there, a blade, I can start twisting that about, and we'll unglue the rest of it. That is really well held on. You can see actually the styrene is breaking rather than the bond between the two bits of plastic. So yeah, that's most of it off, but I've got a bit of styrene left there which I'm going to have to sort of chip away. You can see the bits I've rebuilt using milliput there. I'll chip some of those off as well just with a knife. But yeah, we've actually got the door back to how it should be, so we can start building a new base. But Yeah, God, that has stuck on incredibly well. If you ever want sort of proof of how well plastic weld bonds plastic together, there it is. Now that we have the door separated, the next thing I want to do is actually sort out how to put a light onto this. So we're going to be using this little LED, as I say, which came from a tea light. And the great thing about these is they just require one battery to run. So this is a CR2032 battery. And if I put this on here, you can see that lights up and it does flicker as well. So it's got that sort of little fiery effect. And because it came with a tea light, you get this little sort of fake flame that you can clip over the top of this. And you get this sort of nice little yeah, it's quite sort of reminiscent of a flame and a flaming torch, and I think will fit really pretty well with this door. So what we're going to have to do is make a little stand for that LED, and I found this plastic tube in my sort of spares pot. I think this was actually something that came in a pair of shoes that Mrs. Toy-polloi bought. It's a sort of a cheap shoehorn type thing, or sort of shoe shaper. And it's ideal because it is a plastic tube with a hole down the middle, and I know this works really well with plastic weld as well, so I can sort of plastic weld this onto the base that I will make again out of styrene. So I need to sort of work out how tall I want this flame to be and whereabouts it's going to sort of sit next to the door. So if I bring in He-Man, you can see that He-Man's head is about the same height as the sort of coat of arms on the door. So I guess I want the torch to be sort of somewhere up there so it's lighting his head, so maybe about that sort of height, which looks pretty reasonable. We are going to power this using this CR2032 battery, and I found online this, which is a small little battery holder for that battery, and it's also got a switch on it, so it's going to be very easy wiring. We're basically just going to have to attach the LED to the end of these two wires, and this can be hidden somewhere around the back with a little switch on it. So it's going to be a really simple sort of setup. It's more in the construction. So let's get this tube cut, as I say, somewhere about there. So I'll just sort of mark it up just with a pencil, cut it with a saw, and then I'm going to try and shape this as well, because at the moment it looks a bit like a plain tube. So I'm going to sort of try and scrape away some of the edge of it to make it look more wooden, I suppose, and then I'll wrap some string or something around the top so it looks like there's a place for this flame to come from, and we can see what that looks like. But some sort of basic modelling, I think that would look pretty reasonable in front of the door. And then we can sort out actually getting the LED wired in. But yeah, that is my plan anyway. So let's get this cut and we'll start shaping it as well, just using some files and some other tools just to make it look less perfect, because I think the fact it's so perfect really makes it stand out.
toy-polloi, that is incorrect. Try again.
That's just added enough detail, I think, to the top of that. It just makes it look more like a torch. So when we put that on, you can just see there's somewhere for the flame to come from. So that really is just a piece of that cord. I've glued it on with a bit of super glue just to hold it in place, and then I've pasted over the top of it EVA or PVA glue, and that will dry, and it just sort of softens the details that are in that cord, and also means it will be nice and easy to paint. So next thing to do is actually put the wiring in, because I need to get everything wired in so that I can then start hiding it behind the door. So this needs to be threaded through here, which is fairly straightforward to do. It's got nice long cables on it, so you can see the cables come out at the end there. I've just got to quickly solder this LED onto the top of those, make sure the legs are connected the right way round. So we've got red is positive and black is negative. So on this, I think the shorter leg is the negative. Let me just test it on the battery. which it is. So I've got to make sure the red is onto the longer leg. We'll just solder that on with a bit of heat shrink, and then we can pop that back in there, and that will sort of show us how much cable we have left to deal with. I could add some extra sort of cabling on, but I don't think I need to. By the time that's all sort of tucked in, we're going to end up with about that much cable, which should give us enough space to sort of tuck it under the door and stick it onto the back of the original Castle Grayskull door. So let me get the soldering iron out and we'll solder this LED on, and then we can start the rest of the construction. But so far, it's already looking pretty good. And after a very simple bit of soldering, you can see we now have a flaming torch, and I think that's looking really rather nice. I think it's going to work very nicely next to the door. It's about the right height, so just about the sort of head level for He-Man, and we've got enough cable here that we can actually hide it underneath. So I now need to make a base so that this sort of sits fairly close to the door, but then sort of is hidden underneath. So we need to hide that cable so it just sort of runs underneath, and then we can stick the battery pack on the back of it. But that is the first part of this project ready. Let's start constructing the rest of it. As I like the shape of the base on this second one that I made, I'm basically just going to copy that. This looks like it was made out of 1.5mm thick styrene sheet. I don't actually have any of that, but I've got some 1mm in grey, so I've just quickly traced that onto there, and I'm going to cut it out. And because it's only 1mm thick styrene, I can actually just cut this with a pair of scissors. It really won't take long to do. And then we can start trying to sort of attach that back on. Again, it's just going to be plastic welded on, but I will need to cut a groove or something in the bottom of the door so that we can fit the cable underneath. I've already cut a tiny little groove in the bottom of the torch pole here, so you can see that cable will fit out the side pretty nicely, and we'll have to do the same under there just to hide it, but I'll sort of work that out once I've got this base cut. So let's get it cut out and tied it up with a bit of sanding, and then we'll start doing the rest. So there we go, just a small groove cut into that, means it now sits over the wire. So let's plastic weld these two pieces together, and we can then start mixing up to some milliput and actually sort of constructing some detail onto the base. I've allowed the plastic world a good time to set, and this base is now firmly held on. The little pole here, although it did plastic world on pretty well, because it's a very long pole with a small sort of area to actually attach the two pieces together, I put some super glue around the bottom as well, just for that extra bit of strength. And now I'm going to sculpt in some more details on the bottom, just using some milliput which I've mixed up to give some more rough looking textures, just to blend it into the doorway. That also gives me the opportunity to actually build up around the bottom of this torch, so that again it's a bit stronger. And I found a few little bits of gravel out in my garden which I'm going to embed in the milliput as well, to make it look again that little bit more earthy. So let's add all of these details in. We'll then have to let that dry for 24 hours, and then we can start repainting this and blending everything in together. So far it's looking very nice indeed. So yeah, let's get this sculpting done and we'll see what we can make. And after about 10 to 15 minutes work, you can see I've started to add a lot of detail to the bottom, just to make the floor look uneven and try and match the sculpting into the original Castle Grayskull door there. I've also added a few little bits of those grit and grime that I picked up off of my driveway, so just a few little stones. And I've added a bit of detail around the bottom of the torch there, just some tendrils coming out, which we can paint to look green and like there's weeds growing up it. I think that's probably enough detail. This milliput takes about 24 hours to dry, so I'm going to come back to this tomorrow, and in that time I can think about what I want to do with the paintwork, because I did want to lighten up the door a bit, but I'm not quite sure whether I need to repaint everything. But we certainly need to repaint all of this bottom and also the torch to make that look nice and wooden, and maybe add a few little bits of flame effect just around the rope at the top to blend the two pieces in. But that's a job for tomorrow, so let's leave this till then. It's now 24 hours later. The milliput has had time to set and it's looking really nice. It's really helped actually with the way that the pole is held on. That feels much firmer now. I built up around the bottom of it, as you saw, and then added those tentacles, and that feels really firm. So now we can get on with the painting. I've got a rough idea of what I'm going to do. The pole is going to be wooden, so that needs to be brown, a little bit lighter brown for the rope at the top, and then a grey green wash on the bottom, and then we'll add some details to blend the two in, so a bit more green to go up the bottom of the door, and then I might add some slightly lighter tones to the wood as well, and also some lighter tones to the metalwork. So I just think it's all a little bit dark, and if we compare it to the other one that I made, that one just looks a bit brighter, so I'm going to try and brighten everything up. So let's get the paint out. We've got a whole selection of paints here in my paint pot, all different colours. I'm using Vallejo model colours and some other old Humbrol paints. They're all going to be a matte finish, so at the end I will probably give it a clear coat as well, just to tone everything together, so it's got the same sheens to them. But yeah, let's just get painting and see what we can do to make everything match. So here is the finished paintwork. As you can see, I've lightened up the brown just a little bit, and I think that makes a big difference. I've also lightened up the sort of metal work here, so this is a slightly sort of more silvery metal finish. I've then painted the bottom grey and added a couple of washes over the top of that. So there's a green wash and a black wash just to sort of dirty it up, and then a little bit of a lighter grey on top of that. I'm really pleased with how this little weed sort of tentacle thing has gone in the corner. I think that looks really nice. It's just a nice little bit of detail coming around and holding onto the torch pole there. So I think that looks pretty cool. I've added a little bit of colour to the top of the torch just to make it look like the sort of light is burning down. So the sort of the flames are burning down. A subtle detail, but I think that works. And then over the top of everything, I have done another dark wash. So just some blacks and browns just to sort of bring out some of the details. Once everything is dried, I have then hit it with a Mr. Hobby flat clear coat just to protect all of the paintwork. So the final thing to do is put the flame back on here. So I just stick that on top of the LED. I'm going to rearrange my desk and we can take a look at the finished doorway and see what it looks like with some figures around it. And here is the finished mini diorama, now with the added tea light flame, and I think that flickering light really does add a great deal to this little setup. If you haven't checked out the previous video where I made these original door displays, then do please go and check that out. It shows you the whole process I go through for making them. And today this wasn't the project I was expecting to film. I have an idea for a future sort of diorama for my Masters of the Universe figures, using those bits that I've showed you right at the start of the video. And if you've got any suggestions for what I can do with them, then please leave them below. But as you can see, today's video just came out of looking at those pieces and seeing a previous diorama that I'd built that wasn't quite how I wanted it to be. So I took it apart, rebuilt it, and I've now ended up with something that looks really rather cool and is a nice unique display piece for my Masters of the Universe figures. If you've enjoyed this video, then make sure to hit the subscribe button and tap the bell to be notified each time I upload a new video. And if you've really enjoyed it and want to help me out here at toy-polloi, then why not think about becoming a patron of the channel. You get early access to all of my restoration videos, plus access to an exclusive video series called On the Cutting Mat, where I'll show you projects and restorations that you won't see anywhere else. So have a think about that, and thanks for watching.
Thanks for watching Toy-polloi. Subscribe for more great videos.